Hello, everybody. Welcome to the AP Lit live session. We are so excited that you're here with us today. And we have our special guest, Dr. David Miller, the chief reader for AP Lit, is with us. I'm so excited. I'm Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia. Here is my co-host, Bear Barber. Looks like he's going to sleep through this again. And I just want to give a couple of shout outs before we start. And this is, I got some kind of contradictory information. So this is really interesting. It's really like a complex issue because some students from Miss Purdue's class in Quincy, California said, Miss Purdue's the best AP Lit teacher ever, and her class really loves her. But then Miss Taylor's class from Heritage Christian High School in New Berlin, Wisconsin, wrote and said that Miss Taylor is the best AP Lit teacher. So
Uh-oh.
how are both of those things true? I don't know, but here's what I know. There are lots of great teachers out there, lots of great AP Lit teachers, committed teachers. I wish all of you could see the emails we're getting from your students who love you and brag on you, not just because of the content you're delivering, but because of the care that you're giving to your students during this time. And I just want to say to all the teachers out there, happy Teacher Appreciation Week. You guys rock. Love y'all. With me today, Mr. Escobar. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I know I always say that, but this is the highlight of my day. I'm Carlos Escobar from Miami, Florida, representing Felix Varela Senior High School. And just before I got on this Zoom call and YouTube lesson, I was with Mr. Walter's class all the way in Managua, Nicaragua, representing my homeland, which was very exciting. That's as close as I've gotten to Nicaragua since I left it when I was 6 years old,
Hmm.
and I'm a 41-year-old man now. So it was a little emotional. It was a little magical, to tell you the truth. Mm, it it shook me a little. It was I wasn't expecting that, but thank you so much to Mr. Walters and your wonderful students for reminding me that we are all in it together, as we've been saying. We we're gonna start with a quiz. Why not? We have a
Ah,
big examination coming up. It only makes sense that we start with a quiz.
is this like a pop quiz? You
It
didn't announce
is a
this.
pop quiz, absolutely. But you know what? These are AP students. They're ready
Okay,
for anything, right?
fair point.
Um, what do Robert Frost and Maya Angelou have in common? Now, they're both poets. They have both sadly passed away,
We can dig deeper than this,
but
though.
we got to dig deeper, right? Maybe a picture will help. You know, a picture that's not print text, right? Let's see. Oh,
Mm.
man. Those are some fancy digs we see there, right? Well, they're both presidential inaugural poets, right? Presidential inaugural poets. We see Robert Frost on the left, and he had the honor of writing a poem and declaring it before Congress during inauguration for John F. Kennedy's inauguration. And on the right we have Maya Angelou and she wrote a poem during Bill Clinton's inauguration. Now, quiz question number two: who was the last presidential inaugural poet? And I got to tell you, Miss Barber, he's pretty close to Atlanta, but he's even closer to Miami.
Ah,
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he we graduated from the same college, go
wow.
FIU, and we live about 15 minutes apart. Who knew? I live close to a living god here, right? And we have Richard Blanco. Now, why do we start with this quiz? What are we? My students don't trust me. They always think, like if I tell them, do you want to play a game? They're like, what are you up to? There's something in it, right? And the idea is this: from the steps of Congress to our classroom, we will have presidential inaugural poet hosting a masterclass with us on Thursday at noon. We are so thrilled. He is magical to listen to. But he's only here because absolutely every teacher out there and every student out there deserves the very best. And Miss
Mhm.
Barber and I and the College Board and everyone involved thought, who better than presidential inaugural poet to help us close out this amazing magical experience we've been on, and wish everyone out there good luck. Something interesting: And before we receive the emails, yes, this year's exam will focus on prose. We started these lessons with poetry. We will end with a poet because what matters is not the assessment, it's the course and the totality of the course. And whether you're talking prose or poetry or drama, the written word, the power that it has to bind all of us is what we're celebrating here today. And we're going to celebrate it with inaugural poet Richard Blanco. So I'm very excited to announce that.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. And as we've said, the whole time, this, this class, AP Lit, it's all about the exam, but it's also not at all about the exam. And we live in that dichotomy all year. And so we hope that some of these lessons have prepped you for the exam, but we also just want to step back and think for a minute about the written word and the power of the written
Absolutely.
word. And what a great way to close our
But I
time
have no
out.
social media. So I need all of you out there to tell your friends and tell the teachers and
It's
tell
all
everyone
on
we
me.
gotta join us. And Ms. Barber, you gotta put this on Facebook now. But let's get down to business because Ms. Barber and I felt so ill-equipped. We've given you everything. Yesterday we had you write an essay and you sat through it and you did it. And then Ms. Barber and I were saying, but what else do we have to give? And we decided, you know what? We're just pretending we know what we're doing. We need to go to the source. We need to go to the oracle. We need to go to the fountain of knowledge and the fountain of kindness. And we knew exactly who to turn to. And we are thrilled that today, Dr. David Miller, he is the department chair of English and philosophy at Mississippi College. He is also the chief reader extraordinaire for the College Board for AP English Literature and Composition. Without further ado, Mr. David Miller, thank you, Dr. David Miller, thank
I'm
you for joining us today.
so excited. First of all, it's Teacher Appreciation Week. So let me just voice what many people are already feeling, which is the two of you need to be appreciated in so many different ways for what you've done over the last few weeks. You guys are superstars. To be here every day to sort of give us a center point to focus on in AP English Lit. And I deeply appreciate the work that you've done. I know that the development committee, which is responsible for the test, appreciates the work that the two of you have done. And teachers and students around the world, as you know, appreciate what you've done. So thank you for doing that, for showing up every day, for sharing your lives with us the way teachers do all the way around the world. And thanks for having me in here. So I'm not department chair, but I am professor in the Department of English and Philosophy at Mississippi College, which is just outside of Jackson. It's where I've been sheltering. I'm normally at home, but I came to my office this morning for a couple of meetings. And so I'm coming to you from my office. And it's great for me to be here with you all. Let me say a big shout out to students and teachers who are watching us and who will be watching us. I know, because I have been watching you from time to time, that you do shout outs. So I want to do a couple shout outs. My university is located in Clinton, Mississippi, which is just outside of Jackson. And so my first shout out is to the AP English Literature class at Clinton High School, which is led by Alex Davis Williams, an outstanding teacher in her own right, and one of my former students. So I'm very excited about that connection that I have to the local AP classroom. And then, Carlos, you mentioned Nicaragua. I don't come from Nicaragua. I come from the hills of Pennsylvania, from a rural county in northern Pennsylvania called Tioga County. And I went to Wellsboro Area Senior High School, and I want to give a shout out to the AP students at Wellsboro Area Senior High School who are preparing for the exam. And if you're watching this either live or online, I'm thinking about you all. Their teacher is the daughter of one of the people I went to high school with. So I have all these great connections to this. And to those students in Wellsboro, I was an AP Lit student back, well, let's just say a few years ago. I had Mr. Brian Staller was my AP teacher. I've talked about him publicly before and the work that he did in AP and how that changed my life and what that did for me. I was a rural factory worker son from nowhere, Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. And he taught me AP Lit, and I remember very clearly sitting in his class one day and thinking, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to do this.
It was magical, wasn't it?
It was amazing. It was amazing. So tell me a little bit about what you all have been doing in the classes so far. I've seen a couple of them, but tell me just a little bit about what you've covered.
Well, Dr. Miller, before we do that, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Because I think a lot of the students out there, maybe some of the teachers are saying, well, what is a chief reader? Is this just the guy who's read the most books in the United States, right? Like what? Because I think the contextualizing, I think the value of your visit to us and why we're so honored to have you, I think comes with that position that
what is it that I do?
renders you the oracle, yeah.
Yes.
Right. What is it that I do? Right. So one of the things that makes the advanced placement program unique, and specifically the literature part of that program, but all 38 exams, the thing that makes the advanced placement program unique is that it's designed by teachers, and it's implemented by teachers, and it's scored by teachers. So I am a practicing teacher. I've been here at the university for almost 30 years. And I teach the intro level literature courses here at the university. I have 2 sections of it just finishing up this week. And so the job that I have with advanced placement is to help organize and manage the scoring of these AP exams. So as students write these AP exams, we want to make sure that they are human read. We don't want them read by a machine. Right? We want to make sure that there are real people on both sides of this equation. And so part of my job is to help organize and manage each year that reading, where we bring together English teachers from high school and from college. We bring them together, we sit them down together, we train them to read these student essays, and all of the AP English Lit essays are human scored. There's a human being looking at that essay, and there's a human being writing that essay. And it's such a great moment, right, where across time and space, those two things come together. So you have the students out there who are going to be writing that essay, right, who are giving us their best thoughts, right? And on the other hand, we have teachers from high school and college who are going to be reading that essay. I have called that over the past few years, the great conversation. And what I mean by that is that readers have this opportunity to reach out and hear what student voices are saying, right? And some of you out there, some of your teachers have been to the reading, you've heard me say this, but one of the things that I always remind these people who are reading these student essays, every time they pick up an essay, every time they click on an essay, this is somebody's student, this is somebody's child, this is a real live person who is pouring her heart into this essay, who's pouring his heart into this essay, who's trying to give us their best thinking, right? And we want to be able to honor that. I feel very honored every time I pick up a student essay, to be able to listen to these student essays, right? To be able to listen to this. And so that's what I do. This year it will be, we will have well over 1,000 teachers involved in the reading of these essays. And I'm so excited to be on the coordinating end of that. We're coordinating that right now. and it's a big job. We're going to have probably close to 1,500 readers. So that's my job. And this year, of course, it'll all be online. Usually it's face-to-face, but I'm excited about that. So that's what I do. And I also serve on the development committee. I go around, I get to talk about AP, I get to talk to students, I get to talk to teachers, and it's a great opportunity for me to do that. I feel very privileged. I've got one more year to do this, and then I will exit stage left, pursued by a bear, to reference a Shakespeare play. And somebody else will come in and take over this position. But it's been a privilege and an honor for me to do that, and it's a privilege and an honor for me to be here today. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that clarification. So to answer your question,
yeah,
Ms. Barber, what have we been doing for the last 6 weeks, right? And I think we ground ourselves in this, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've looked at the course and exam description. We've looked at this manual and really I mean, I think we've pretty much covered every skill that has been addressed in there, and we have really had targeted lessons to every skill, skills that help students become better readers. So like, what does characterization really mean? How do we make meaning out of how an author is constructing a character or developing a character? What about contrast? How does contrast work within a text? Also, really, when we think about reading, one thing that we have stressed over and over, and I'm sure you will today, is not just identification. Oh, I see the move this author is making here, but what is the function of that? So how does that really enhance the text or help develop a central or controlling idea or character progression? So not just identification, but function. So we've talked a lot about reading, and then the past couple of weeks we've talked about writing. Now that we know how to read closely, how do we think about these ideas? What's the best way to organize these ideas and get them out on paper? So that's a lot. That's a lot.
So whenever we talk about this, I always think about my brother. I have two brothers, but I have a brother who's closest to me in age. And for many years, he was a diesel mechanic. And you might think that he and I do very different things. But in fact, he and I share the same thinking skills. And it's the thinking skill that you've just described, right? Which is that he is able to take apart a diesel engine and understand how each of those constituent parts of that engine work to make the engine work, right? So if we're thinking about characterization, right? Think of characterization, think of Lady Macbeth as the engine, right? So what are the bits and pieces that Shakespeare has put into Lady Macbeth to make her work, right? And how do those bits and pieces function? So the idea here is that we've got an engine, and engines are made up of bits and pieces. We have a text. Texts are made up of bits and pieces. So part of what you've been learning to do as students over the last year or over the last semester is that you've been learning about how to see those bits and pieces, right? And you've been looking at, oh, here's this bit, here's this piece, whatever it is. Here is a contrast. Here is a rhyme scheme. Here is a particular diction pattern that we've identified. What is that doing, right? How does it function in the engine, right? But the other amazing thing that my brother's able to do, and I wish he were going to hear me say this because I don't say nice things about my brother very often, but one of the amazing things that my brother is able to do is that he's not only able to take an engine and understand how it works, he's able to take those bits and pieces and put them into other contexts, right? He can construct his own engine, right? Which is a pretty amazing thing. And that's where the writing comes into play. Writing, whether it's a prose passage on an exam or the essay that I'm writing in response to that prose passage, writing is made up of bits and pieces. So if I can read the bits and pieces, right, if I can identify the bits and pieces, then I can transfer those bits and pieces into my own essay and build my own engine. Does that make sense? It's my little metaphor to talk about.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know, I think if I can play student for a second, Dr.
Sure.
Miller, within a 40 or 45 minute time constraint to write the perfect essay seems like so daunting and so like how do you expect me to do this in 40 or 45 minutes? How can I possibly write a polished, perfect essay, which is clearly what you want from me, in 40-45 minutes? What do you say to that student who keeps harping on the impossibility of writing perfection in that time period? Because so there's a lot of pieces in that engine, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces in that engine. So here's the good news. And this, if I can deliver some good news, this is the good news. We're not expecting the perfect essay. That's not what we're asking, right? We recognize, and when I say we, I mean, I'm speaking now on behalf of the readers, right? These human beings who are going to be reading these essays, right? We understand that this is a 45-minute period, right? That students are drafting their response. We understand that. If I were to sit down with a brand new passage, which I've never seen before, and write an essay, it would not be perfect. And this is my job. This is what they pay me to do, right? And it would not be perfect in 45 minutes, right? So we're not expecting perfection, right? What we are expecting is to be able to see the evidence of thinking, right? So can we see the evidence of thinking? So what does that mean? Well, that means, do you have an idea about this passage? Ms. Barber spoke about making meaning. Do you have a meaning? Do you have an idea? We might call that the thesis. We might call that the claim, whatever you want to call it. But do you have an idea about this passage, right? We need to see that, of course, right? We want to see that. And then underneath that, we need to see some of those bits and pieces, right? How did you get to that idea? If you're going to make this claim, right? I know you all took a look at the Silas Lapham passage yesterday, these two sisters in this remarkable family. If you have an idea about those two sisters, how did you get that idea, right? Where are the bits and pieces? Where is the evidence, right? And can you show me then, not just the bits and pieces, but how the bits and pieces add up, right? Can you show me how you took the steps to get to that? So we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for evidence, right? And that's helpful, I think, right? If a student misspells or if a student mispunctuates, right? As long as I can understand what that student is getting at, as long as I can understand what that student is reaching for, I'm fine, right? Do we want you to know how to write a polished essay? Yes. Right? Sure, you need to know how to workshop an essay. You need to know how to go back and revise an essay. That's a very important part of this, but that's not what we're testing on the test, right? So I know there's a lot of people out there who are reaching for perfection. I've always said, you know, people tell me I'm doing a good job or whatever, and I always say, I just want to do a pretty good job most of the time, right? If I can get up every day and do a pretty good job, right, then that's what I want to do. And I would say that to students, look, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that will probably take a lot of pressure off of students, which is good.
Yeah.
At the same time, there probably are some things that you tend to see in stronger essays. Not perfect, but well constructed. So what would some of those traits be?
So I think, again, you've got a clear claim, you've got a clear thesis, right? It doesn't have to be at the beginning, by the way. I love to tell this story because it happened a couple semesters ago. I was teaching a British survey class, which is my intro level lit class. And I had a non-English major in there who was a really interesting student. He came from a very different background, had very different ideas, but engaged with the class, and I enjoyed having him in class. And it came to the final exam, and they have a kind of comparison contrast essay that they're working with, that they see the question cold, and then they write it. And so he wrote for the entire 3-hour final exam. Like, he just wrote like crazy. Everybody else had gone. He was the only one left in the room. And finally, I just walked over to him and I said, Trey, you're going to have to give me your test. Like, I'm leaving. You got to give me your test. And he sort of dropped back in his chair, and he had written like 3 pages full. And he took his pencil and he underlined the last sentence that he had written. And he said, okay, Dr. Miller, that's my thesis. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's how it works sometimes, right? Sometimes we have to work our way into it, right? That's fine, but you've got to have that idea. It's got to be there, right? So that's one of the things that we're looking for. We're looking for that idea. The other thing, I think, is that you mentioned this, Ms. Barber. You can't just point to the bits and pieces. You can't just say, oh, here's a bit, here's a bit, here's a bit, right? No one ever got a birthday cake by just putting a cup of flour and 2 eggs out on the counter, right? They don't magically come together on their own, right? You've got to be the cook. You've got to be the one who stirs all this together. So what I mean by that is, if you identify a bit that you think is important, I think diction in this paragraph is important, and here are some bits of diction that I think are important. or I think this image, this metaphor is important, and here's this metaphor. You've got to tell me what's important about it.
Mhm.
You can't expect me as a reader to just automatically see it, right? And I know that sometimes as teachers, we do that, right? We sort of stand in front of the class sometimes and we point out something that we think is beautiful or important, and we say, isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? And if you've ever been a student in that situation and you've thought to yourself internally,
Sure, I don't see it, but okay, right? Yeah.
what's wonderful about that? What's beautiful about that? then you're in my position, right? You need to be able to explain that. We as teachers need to be able to explain how those things work, right? It does no good, for example, I was teaching sonnets a few weeks ago online. It does me no good to point out the rhyme scheme of a sonnet, just to point out the rhyme scheme of a sonnet. Who cares, right? If that doesn't do something, if that doesn't help make meaning, right? So those upper tier essays are going to do that. They're going to have that clear claim. They're going to have an idea. And then they're going to have those bits and pieces which add bits of explanation. This is where the student's voice comes in. This is where the conversation comes in, right? It's not just in giving me the bits and pieces that the author's given us. It's in those explanations that I get to hear that student in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, or I get to hear that student in Nicaragua, or I get to hear that student in Wyoming or Wisconsin or California talking to me about what he or she sees in that particular passage. Right?
Should we see what you mean by that? Should we turn maybe to
Yeah.
Silas and look at
Let's do that, because again, I could talk all day long, but let's
but I think it's so important. You know, I again, I'm listening to you from a student's perspective because I enjoy that. I enjoy that role as well, right? And so far, I feel like I don't have to be perfect. I also feel that you haven't, and thank God for this, you haven't contradicted anything that either my teachers have told me or that Miss Barber and Mr. Escobar have told me, right? Because I don't want to learn a new method today, right? And I also feel like it's you don't want a prophetic scholar. You just want to see what I bring to the table and what my interpretation is, and it's okay to you know, so I want to see that in action. I want to see what you mean by a student's voice on paper. Should we look at the prompt and passage? Should we go straight to samples? What do you
They've
feel
just looked at in the interest of time, let's just go ahead to the samples. Is that all right?
That's good.
I'm happy to say, and this is for teachers and students out there, so let me just say this. The samples that we're showing you today are ones that you have not seen. We've got 2 new samples to share with you. College Board's been very gracious. We've got a couple of samples in the hopper that we haven't revealed. And they've been very gracious to let me do this today with you all, to bring you 2 sample essays on the Silas Lapham passage, which you haven't seen yet. These samples are going to be available to you in the Google Docs. I think they may already be available to you in the Google Docs if you want to pull them up. And tomorrow, by the end of day, we'll probably have some official commentary to go with those. So what I'm going to do today is just sort of verbally talk you through this. I will be talking in terms of the new rubric, right, which you've all seen. So we'll talk about row A, we'll talk about row B, we'll talk about row C in connection with these essays. But I just wanted to give you some examples, right, in terms of this. So Mr. Escobar, let's just scroll down to this first sample. And you all are going to have the opportunity to read these, right? So what I want to do today, really in the interest of time, is just to talk through a couple of things about these samples. You can see at the top of the sample response, you can see the score. This was consensus scored. And what that means is that multiple people have read the essay and scored it together, and we've agreed upon it, right? And so that's important to know. And so the numbers at the top of the essay just correspond to the lines of the rubric. So the first number is row A, that has to do with defensible claim. The second number is row B, that has to do with evidence and commentary. And then the last number, the third number, has to do with row C, which is commonly known as the sophistication point. I like to think of it as the overall control point. Somehow the word sophistication sometimes is a little off-putting. I'm not very sophisticated most of the time, but I do like to be in control, right? And to demonstrate control. So that's sometimes how I talk about row C. But if we look at this sample essay, so this student was asked the same prompt that you all saw yesterday with the Silas Lapham passage. And so I just want to go ahead and just really quickly look through this essay with you all. If we look at the defensible claim, look at that first sentence right off the bat in that sample. And we get this wonderful sort of claim right off the bat. Now, your claim doesn't have to be at the beginning of the essay. This particular sample has it at the beginning of the essay. William Dean Howells utilizes an ironic tone built up with contrasting ideas as well as nature imagery to reflect how the sisters were limited in their family upbringing, despite their status, but that they could still be the best versions of themselves in society if they were willing to be open to new experiences, as seen in the younger sister. So there's a couple things about that claim that I want to talk about right off the bat. The important thing about that claim is that it is a claim. It's an assertion. It's something that is not just a description. It's something that has to be supported, right? If I write an essay and I say this essay is about house cats, that's just a description. Right? The essay either is about house cats or it's not about house cats, right? In this passage, William Dean Howells portrays two sisters.
Period. Right.
That's a description. I don't have to prove that. That's self-evident, right? So the claim that we're looking for just has to be something that I need to support. It's not something that has to be terribly controversial. It's not something that has to be terribly radical. It's just something that I would need to supply evidence to prove, right?
Dr. Miller, this introduction and this claim here is also, I think, introducing a concept that we've talked about in the past, which is your introduction does not have to be long.
Yeah.
And there isn't a list in the rubric or provided by the College Board that an introduction must do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Here's a student who wrote a single sentence, but it has a claim, it's defensible, and it does a lot more than just provide any ordinary defensible claim, right? Which I'm sure you're going to get into. But here we have one sentence sort of define what some students understand, right? I need 5 sentences, 6 sentences, 7 sentences of like exposition and introduction, and with what time is what I always tell those students, right? And the other thing is, and I'm sure someone out there is saying, yeah, but this year we don't have the author. It doesn't matter, does it?
No,
student could have said the author utilizes an ironic tone built up, and we don't lose anything.
Yeah, we don't lose a thing here without that, right? That's absolutely true. So let me just, again, I'm going to reiterate because I think it's so important that this kind of essay is different than the polished kind of essay that we might do in a workshop over several weeks, right? They're two different kinds of writing, both of which are valuable, right? So yeah, in a sort of workshopped essay, I would want my introduction to do a set of things, right? But in this kind of timed writing, when I'm doing a draft, I don't need that. I need to get in, I need to get started, right? I don't need to start with the creation of the world to get to Silas Lapham, right? I don't need to do the funnel. I don't need to do any of that, right? But I do need to make a claim, right? Now, the other thing that this sentence does, well, let me say, this claim establishes complexity, right? Now, ideally, your claim would do that, right? Ideally, since we're interested in complexity in a text, your claim would do that. We're going to see a sample in a minute that doesn't quite do that, but still makes a claim. But this one does make a claim about complexity. The other thing this sentence does, though, that you don't have to do, but it does, this sentence does do this, is if we go back to the first part of the sentence, Howells utilizes an ironic tone built up with contrasting ideas and nature imagery. That's going to lay out the plan of the essay. As you read through the essay, you're going to see the student has a bit of an outline there, right? That's not required. To get the point in row A, you don't need that, right? It's helpful for the student to organize the ideas,
Mhm.
right? But if you get the claim, you're going to get the point in row A, right? It's just this essay happens to do that, right?
Absolutely.
When we move into the body of this essay, and again, thinking about time, when we move into the body of this essay, one of the things I love about this essay is that when you read through it, you'll be able to see this, that each time the student picks out a bit of the engine of this passage, right? When the student goes in and isolates in the first paragraph some examples of diction, right? Which is what the student wants to write about in order to support the ironic tone. That the student, every time the student goes in and picks out a bit, right? The student is very careful to give us some explanation. Here's why I picked this out, right? Here's what I think this is doing, right? This particular word, right? There's this wonderful part in the middle of that second paragraph. This is built up with seemingly eloquent words like stylishly, and we get an illegible moment there, words like rustic, because it reflects the idea that appearance on the outside and true character are completely different. The student's coming in here telling me, this is what this means. I'm pointing these words out, but this is why I'm pointing these words out, right? Now, I want to say something here that I don't think maybe has been made public yet, but I want to go ahead and make it public, is that on this year's exam, because of the multiple platforms that students will be working with, the passage will not have line numbers, okay? And I know that that's maybe a little different than what students and teachers were expecting, but there was just no way in terms of making sure that this passage would work on multiple platforms that we could make that work, right? So I want to assure students, right, that as readers, we're going to have the passage available. We're going to be able to see when they're quoting from the passage, for example. They don't need to give us line numbers because they won't be there, right? If they want to think about paragraph numbers, they can do that. If they just feel like they need to give us something, right? They can tell us that. But if you're quoting from the passage, I promise you we'll be aware of that, and we'll know where in the passage that's coming from.
Could you also reassure students, because sometimes students say, certainly I'm going to have textual evidence and I'm going to have apt and specific textual evidence.
Good.
But sometimes I'll say, in lines 13 through 17, and not necessarily quote anything, but definitely provide commentary after that. Yeah. Can you reassure us that it's okay for students to sort of like estimate, say in the first third of the passage, in the middle part of the passage, and
or the
those
second
types,
paragraph, in the third paragraph.
right? Yeah, and those sort of reference points are still valid, correct?
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we will be able to do that. If you want to direct, if you're going to paraphrase, if you're going to make a general reference like that, that would be the way to do it. That's great, Mr. Escobar. That's exactly right. Right? To be able to help us to see this, or to say that, in the first half of the passage, this is generally true. In the second half of the passage, we're going to be able to sort of see that. Yeah, and we recognize that the lack of line numbers is different this year. But again, I think just because we want to make sure that it works on every platform, or as many platforms as we can, we couldn't do that. So back to this essay though, we see that every time the student makes a reference like that, we get that explanation, right? The other thing I like about this essay that I want to point out, because I know that as we move into row B and we're looking at evidence and commentary, this essay does a great job of doing what we've been calling in the rubric language, establishing a line of reasoning. So if you read through this sample, and you will be able to read through this sample when you see it, you're going to see that every literary element that the student is referencing, whether it's diction related to irony, whether it's imagery to show contrast, the student is very careful to sort of show how those all contribute to the point, right? So the student's not just making an observation here about diction and explaining what diction means, right? Or not just pointing out imagery and explaining what imagery means, but the student's actually saying, okay, diction is doing this to help support my point. Imagery is doing this to help support my point. That's what we mean by line of reasoning. It's just that simple, right? Does it all work on the same plane? Is it all contributing toward the same goal?
we've reiterated, and correct us if we're wrong, because it's something we've said many times, is make sure that all of your commentary goes back to your topic sentence, goes back to your thesis. As long as those connections are built in organically, you have a thesis from which your topic sentences will be derived, and all your commentary will be connected to those. Then organically, right, there's a fluidity to your argument here, and the line of reasoning is therefore established.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, I like that word organic, right? It doesn't have to be artificial. It's not just transitional words between paragraphs. I want to emphasize that, right? It's really this connection of ideas back to the claim, right? Back to the claim. How does this contribute to the engine as a whole?
Right.
Right.
And I heard you say once that even more powerful than a transitional word could be even like a phrase that really clarifies all these connections.
Yeah.
Right. Like we've already seen imagery and it led us here, but if we turn our attention to perspective, then we have this new discovery now, all leading back to the thesis, and that those are the types of connections I think that are more valid than first, second, third, and conclusion. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Because as I remind my students, first, second, and third are not really transitions. They're just a list.
Yes.
Right? They're just objects on a page hoping to get lucky.
Right.
And we have to provide that clue. No, absolutely. I think that's well worth it. We also looked at this essay and we said, the control of complexity in this essay is so carefully done, right? The student is conscious of complexity all the way through the essay, that we went ahead and awarded it that row C point as well, right? Because we see the student fully exploring the complexity between these two sisters all the way through this essay. And I know that row C has been a bit of a conversational point for a lot of people. And I just want to say to students right here, row C should never be your goal, right? If you can control your essay, you will get the point in row C. But your goal needs to be in that row B. Can I give evidence? Can I support it with commentary? That's where you're going to earn the most of your points, right? Don't try to be fancy. Don't try to decorate the essay. That's not what row C is about. Row C is not about decoration. Row C is not about ornate, right? Row C is about all the pieces of the essay working together.
Consistently.
Yes.
Right, because we've even received emails from teachers saying, so what are the words that are sophisticated, or what is the syntax pattern that is sophisticated?
It's got to be consistently through the essay. And so you look at this essay, and I think you'll see that. If we go to the next essay, and again, I'm conscious about time, Mr. Escobar, but if we go to the next essay, this essay, you can contrast these two essays. We don't score by comparison contrast. That's not how we score, but for training, for thinking, it's sometimes helpful to see two essays, right, side by side. And that's what I want to do with these essays. If we go back to row A for just a second, right, this is a claim, right? This essay is making a claim. If you look at that, again, at that first paragraph, Howell dials in, is the word. Howell dials in on these experiences through the perspective of family and society. Penelope and Irene face adversity of isolation from a culture and a community. Now that's a claim. It's a little more basic than the one that we saw in the earlier essay. It's a little less clear, like what do we mean by culture? What do we mean by community, right? But it is a claim. It's something that has to be supported and explained in the body of the essay, right? So again, we're going to give the point to the essay, right? Even though these are two very different thesis sentences between these two essays, they both earn that point, right? Now, what happens then in the body of the essay, though, is that the student isn't quite as careful with evidence and commentary. So this student operates, if we look at that third paragraph, for example, this student operates the way some people play cards, which is to say they slam down one card and they expect to have won the entire game on the basis of that one card. So if you look at paragraph 3, we get one piece of evidence, right? As if the student has sort of slammed this trump card down on the table, right?
Yeah, this is it. This is the...
I always tell my students that if you're standing on one leg and trying to have a fight, you're going to fall, right? Much better to stand on 2 legs. Much better to be leaning up against something and have 3, right? You think about just bits of support, right? I want to have as many as I can marshal within the time frame, right? And so we felt like in this essay, we had some evidence and we had some commentary, but that commentary was not fully developed, right? And ultimately, overall, this essay, the student is less in control of all of the elements of the idea. So what actually happens in this, I have transitions, but the transitions here are based almost entirely on the order of the passage, not on the order of the development of the idea, right? So we get the passage starting, we got the shift in the middle of the passage, towards the end of the passage. So the students actually organize the essay based on the passage rather than based on the idea, right? It works, it's functional, right? But it doesn't really rise to full control, right, in terms of that. Now that's
Development, yeah. And we also see the connection, you know, you shouldn't be bound by the rubric exclusively, right? Because if your goal is to earn the point in row A, well, many students perhaps will be able to earn that point. But if you really think of this essay as multiple parts working together to create this incredible car, right? Then the greater sophistication that you can perceive as part of your claim, you're sort of setting yourself up for row B to have more to argue, more claims, more evidence, more commentary, right? So they are discrete rows, but it's one single essay. So
the way we do this at the reading is we read the essay. We don't read for the bits and pieces. We read the essay in the same way that when you see the passage on the exam next week, you're going to read the passage. You're not going to see the discrete bits and pieces initially, right? That's what we do at the reading. We read the essay, read the essay, read the essay, right? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Can we talk about the reading experience then? The platform. What, you know, I'm a student. I've never seen this platform. I'm nervous about it. Will my score, you know, if I've done well all along, am I going to be okay? You know, are the expectations different this year, Dr. Miller? Or will it be more difficult for me to earn the score that I've been working towards and that I've honestly set myself up for, right? Because I feel like this is such new territory. It's a brave new world out there, and I'm just an outsider right now.
Yeah, and everything's hanging on one question. Everything's hanging on 145 minutes, and that seems, oh my gosh, 145 minute. Yeah. So the answer is it's not going to be more difficult, right? We went with the prose analysis question because we felt, and by we, I mean the development committee, I mean the people at College Board, felt that this question gave students the opportunity to demonstrate the most of what they knew, right? And I'm going to borrow a metaphor here from one of the people in College Board, but I think it's really helpful. If I were to go to a tailor and ask to have a shirt made, right? The tailor would take multiple measurements and make sure that every bit of my torso is measured, right? And the shirt would be fitted right to that. Most of the time, when I go to the store, I just have a couple of measurements when I buy a shirt. I have a neck and I have a sleeve size.
That's it.
And I buy a shirt, and 99% of the time, the shirt fits, right? In a normal year, we would have, let's say, 150 different measurement points for a student's AP, right? That's the tailor, right? We can be absolutely sure we fitted that to the student. Given this year's extraordinary environment, right? It's a little bit more like, we know that if we can measure this set of things, we're going to be pretty close to being right about this, right, with this particular student. And so I want students to know that. I want students to feel that, right? We've tried to build an exam where students are going to have every opportunity to succeed. Right? We've not designed an exam that's somehow going to trip them up, or to say, oh, you know, they weren't in physical classrooms for the last 5 weeks. We've got to make sure that we sort those people out. In fact, just the opposite. I mean, every conversation that I've been involved in the last 5 weeks, and I've been involved in a lot of conversations about this exam, but every conversation that I've been involved with has been about what can we do to make sure that students can succeed at this task. Right? So the platform has been designed so that it will work with multiple devices in multiple places as easily as we can possibly make it work, right? We've designed the question to be, again, this FRQ Prose question to give students a text in front of them so that they all have a text in front of them, right? And that we think that reading prose, as opposed to, no offense to Richard Blanco, whom I love dearly, but might be a little bit easier than reading a poem cold, right? So we wanted to make sure that students succeed.
Yeah, it's much more democratizing in that sense, right? A lot of the students already sat through AP Lang, so they're used to prose and that style.
Yeah.
What about perhaps one final question that I have, again, plain student here. Should I type or handwrite? Is there an advantage? It's probably the single most asked question right now. I have terrible handwriting, I might as well type. Or I misspell a couple words, so maybe that's why I'm going to type. And then there's other students who are saying, but I've been handwriting all along. Am I going to now have a disadvantage because I will have a misspelled word, whereas the kid using word processor might have that auto-corrected somehow? Can you speak to that for
so
a minute
in terms of format, right? I can tell you that the readers are going to be instructed, and that's part of my job, is to ensure that that won't be a prejudice either way, right? And not a benefit or a detriment in either way. My advice to students at this point would be, do what you feel comfortable doing. If you feel comfortable handwriting, then by all means handwrite, right? If you feel much more comfortable in front of a keyboard, then by all means use the keyboard, right? Where do you feel comfortable? Right? Again, this is all about helping students to succeed, right? And I don't want students to feel like they need to work in a medium that they're not comfortable in, right? At this point, right? And that's, again, part of what we just tried to design the platform to be able to do.
And I'll just follow up with a couple of quick questions. First, just any advice you have for students on exam day that could help calm their nerves, or even calm teachers' nerves as we're, about a week out. Secondly, how much should they write? Because no matter how long I teach this, and no matter how far into the year I am, that's what students always say. How much should I write?
Yeah. So I'm going to deal with the second one first, and then I'll back up. And then
Right.
I know we're wrapping up. I have one more thing I want to say to that. How much should I write? Here's what I tell my students. I can't see inside your brains, right? I've done some reading in neurology. I'm interested in neurology. I'm interested in brain studies. I know just enough about brain studies to be dangerous with a chainsaw. But I can't see inside, right? All I can see is what you give me, right? And so how much should I write? You should write what you know. You should show me, right? What you know, right? Be aware of your time frame. You've got 45 minutes, but write what you know. Show me what you know. This is not the time to be, succinct is not the right word, but to be suggestive, right? Oh, he'll know what I mean. I won't. I can't. So show me, right? So that's what I would say to that. In terms of advice, my advice is this. I know what I'm going to say, and I know how it's going to be received. So I'm just going to say it.
Just say it.
You need to sleep. The 2 or 3 days before the exam, you need to sleep. You need to go to bed. You need to get sleep. You need to let your brain sort things out. I mean, again, I know enough about neurology and how people learn to know that sleep is important. Sleep, we have this idea that in sleep, I'm not doing anything. Oh my God, your brain is as active in sleep as it is when you're awake. It just has to put your body to sleep so that it can do its work, right? And so get some sleep. Oh my gosh, get some sleep for 2 or 3 nights before the exams. And that's the best thing you can do, right? Trust what your teachers have done. Trust what you've done. You've all done remarkable work, right? This is an extraordinary year. This is the year that you guys are going to be talking about for the rest of your lives. You're going to say, when I was a senior in high school, we had COVID-19. Let me tell you, you're going to be saying to your grandkids while you're sitting on the front porch, let me tell you about what it was like when I was in high school. And we had,
when I met the chief reader for AP English Literature and Composition.
I have something on my wall. I want to bring it up here. I know we're going to get reflection on it, but I'll tell you what it says. So I have this needlepoint, which is a quotation from a novel by the American novelist Dawn Powell, right? And I thought about this quotation because I knew I was going to be with you all today, and I thought this is what I want to say to everybody today. And so this quotation says from her novel, The Locusts Have No King, in a world of destruction, one must hold fast to whatever fragments of love are left. For sometimes a mosaic can be more beautiful than an unbroken pattern. I love that idea, right? I love this idea that a mosaic can be more beautiful than an unbroken pattern. I know that this year has felt like so many fragmented pieces, right? It's felt like that to me, and I'm not a senior in high school, far from it. But I know that it feels like everything we've been facing in the last few weeks has been, oh, I can't do this, or I've lost this, or this piece is broken off, or now I've broken away. And all we see in front of us are these pieces. But if I can say anything to you all, that's what AP is about. It's about recognizing that pieces can come together to make meaning, right? And so in the time that you have left, and that's what I would want to say to you, find the mosaic. Find the mosaic that you can create for this year, right? Whatever these pieces of experiences, right? And these live classes have been part of that, right? These bits and pieces that you all have been doing. That's the mosaic. Find a way to bring these pieces together. You don't have to live with the fragments. You can bring those fragments together, right? I love that idea. And let me just encourage teachers out there who feel that way, find some way to bring those fragments together. You've done more than you think you have. Students, you've done more than you think you have. And the exam can be the place where some of that comes together for us. And we can say, I can write this question. I can write this essay.
And the exam is a place for celebration, absolutely. Of everything. Dr. Miller, you have been so gracious, and we wish the College Board has done such a disservice by having me for the past 6 weeks. They should have had you all along, and I mean that, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You started today by talking about a great conversation, and about doing a pretty good job, and I think you've done a pretty good job, and I think that this has been part of the great conversation, and I think that our conversation wouldn't have been the same without you, sir.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And again, what you and Miss Barber have done goes beyond any expectations. I mean, you guys you've been our teachers. So
thank you for being with us today. Love having your voice in our conversation. Just love the leadership that you give to this community. So we are eternally grateful for that. Tomorrow,
we hope you join us on Thursday. Remember that.
Richard,
yes, tomorrow we're writing an essay, but on Thursday
we're writing an essay, and your last chance to do a practice essay in a time setting with us.
Which I think will be great, because we're going to be able to implement everything that Dr. Miller spoke with us today. And on Thursday, let's celebrate. You know, let's celebrate the pieces, the words, the lines, the poetry. And we've loved having you today, Dr. Miller. We hope you join us again if you have time. If not, I know you're with us in spirit.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow and Thursday and Friday for our very last time. Thank you for watching,
all.
Guys.
Thank you.